I am Tilda Crane, and I was never the kind of daughter who got her name etched into the family silverware. Not that I wanted it, really. I always found the whole tradition tacky, but the symbolism stuck with me. My brother Heath had a gravy boat named after him by the time he turned 15. My older sister Melody had a rose variety in the garden labeled in her honor. Me? I once got a re-gifted cardigan with the tag still on it, and a reminder to keep it quiet at dinner. That pretty much set the tone. I'm a financial analyst, not the kind that lectures you on TikTok about passive income while drinking cold brew, but the kind that gets buried in code and market cycles for 16 hours straight and smiles about it. I like patterns. I like seeing things other people miss. But there's one pattern I never managed to solve until it hit me in the face like a chandelier in a hurricane. My father only valued people who sparkled on the surface. And if you didn't shine like his new wife, Colette, glamorous, smooth-talking, vintage wine-collecting Colette, then you might as well fade into the drywall. But before I tell you how Colette staged the most polite exile in family history, and how I turned that betrayal into something they never saw coming, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. The last time I felt remotely like someone's daughter was a warm Thursday in April. My mother had been gone for just under a year, and I came home to find the portrait in the front hallway replaced. It had been there for 2 decades. Mom in a blue blouse, sitting beneath an old sycamore tree, laughing at something I can't remember. Now it was Colette. Backlit, airbrushed, wearing a silk scarf like she had just stepped off a yacht. The frame was gold. Of course it was. No one said anything about the change, no dramatic unveiling, no, "What do you think?" My father just gestured at the new painting over his paper and muttered, "We needed something brighter." That's when I knew. It wasn't grief that had taken over the house, it was a renovation. Grief would have left room for stories. Colette didn't like stories. She liked silence, minimalism, things that matched. She color-coded the bookshelves and boxed up everything that reminded my father of the old days. She turned the sunroom into a meditation space she never used. My mom's piano vanished. My high school trophies packed away. But Heath's lacrosse jerseys, framed in the upstairs hallway like war medals. For the first few months, I convinced myself I was imagining it. That grief made people act strangely. That maybe this was just temporary. But Colette was efficient. She didn't banish me with screams or slaps. No, she did it in subtle ways, scheduling wine tastings during the rare weekends I visited, converting my old room into a gift-wrapping lounge. She called it making space. The final straw came last December. I showed up for the annual holiday toast, a family tradition my mother had started, where everyone shared one thing they were grateful for. My father used to recite sonnets. Now he read Colette's Instagram captions like scripture. I brought a bottle of a small batch scotch I knew he loved. Colette met me at the door in stilettos and a red velvet dress that practically bled luxury. "Tilda, I didn't know you were coming," she said, smiling the way people do when they're already thinking of something else. I RSVP'd to the group chat. Oh, I must have missed it. And then she stepped aside, slowly, like someone giving a taxi to a stranger they don't really want to help. I was an interruption. An unexpected knock on a window during a dinner party. I stayed for 42 minutes, made one joke that no one laughed at, and left before dessert. I cried in the car, not because they forgot me, but because I was starting to forget what it felt like to be remembered. That night, I curled up on the couch in my apartment and opened a spreadsheet. Yes, that's how I decompress, and stared at something far more loyal than my bloodline. Data. Charts. The business I had been quietly building for 3 years. My mother used to say that legacy isn't what people inherit, it's what they remember. I built something to be remembered. Something no one in that damn house had a clue about. And I was getting closer. A deal was in motion. One that could change everything. But first, I had to survive the Crane family spring dinner. The thing about growing up invisible is that you learn how to catalog silence, not just hear it but recognize its textures. There's the sharp silence of being interrupted and then forgotten mid-sentence, the dismissive silence when your report card, valedictorian, full APs, extracurriculars, gets a distracted nod while your brother's 4th-place squash trophy gets a standing ovation. And then there's the worst silence of all. the polite kind. The kind that smiles at you from across the table while mentally deleting your presence. I didn't always feel erased. There was a time, maybe around age 10, when I thought I was getting through. I built my first financial model in a Hello Kitty notebook using Monopoly money and some vague understanding of risk. I proudly showed it to my father, explaining how I could double his money if he gave me just $5 a week to invest in pretend stocks. He patted my head, chuckled, and said, "Sweetie, why don't you try something simpler, like baking?" That became the pattern. Every time I tried to share something I was proud of, it was redirected, repackaged, minimized. When I got into Northwestern, he said, "That's great. Melody could use help with her business classes. Maybe you two could study together." Melody was getting a communications degree and failing half her courses because she kept joining MLMs disguised as female empowerment incubators. But no one brought that up. At the time, I swallowed the comparisons like bitter vitamins. I told myself I'd be noticed eventually. But eventually turned into years. When I published my first independent paper on volatility modeling in emerging markets, it got picked up by a fintech blog and shared on LinkedIn by 2 CEOs. At dinner that week, my father asked if I'd thought about getting my teeth straightened. Heath, on the other hand, couldn't misstep. He got a C in his economics class and still made it into his father's golf foursome the following weekend. "He's under pressure," they said. "Boys mature slower." I remember sitting at the end of that dinner table, swirling my wine while listening to Heath talk about a business idea, one that was essentially Uber for surfboards. Colette clasped her hands and gasped, "You're such a disruptor." No one noticed I left early that night. But my mother did. Back when she was alive, she was the one person who didn't treat me like a ghost in the chandelier light. She wasn't flashy, she liked loose cardigans, humming while cooking, and drinking cheap rosé from a chipped mug that said, "Ask me about my book club." But she saw me. She knew about my projects, asked about my spreadsheets, and even bought me a second monitor when I started building my first analytics dashboard. After she passed, I tried to hold on to that version of home. But without her, the place became a showroom for pretense and curated elegance. Everything that made it soft was stripped away. I remember walking into the house a few months after her death and finding the hallway closet completely cleared. My board games, old journals, some drawings she'd saved, all gone. Colette had Marie Kondo'd my childhood and donated the remains to a stylish local shelter, as she put it. You'd think that would have been the breaking point, but it wasn't. I kept showing up. Birthdays, anniversaries, even Colette's summer solstice party where she dressed everyone in white and made us drink celery gin. I smiled, I nodded, I asked polite questions about someone's yoga retreat in Big Sur, but every time I left feeling like I had to check for bruises, except they were never on my skin. What finally woke me up wasn't a big dramatic moment. It was one of those throwaway lines, so casual you almost miss it. We were at brunch last August. Colette was organizing a silent auction for some vineyard she liked, and she looked at me over her avocado tartine and said, "Tilda, you're so good with numbers. You should consider helping us with the spreadsheets. Melody's too creative for that stuff." It was the too creative that did it. As if numbers were a punishment. As if I hadn't built an entire framework of forecasting models that private equity firms had offered to license. As if I hadn't already created something extraordinary while they were busy filtering their lives through champagne flutes and Instagram filters. That's when I stopped waiting for their applause. I dove deeper into my project. A full-stack analytics platform for ethical investing. Nothing splashy, nothing crypto-hyped. Just clean, efficient tools to help socially conscious investors navigate volatile markets. I called it Lumagrid. No one in my family knew it existed. By the time Colette was planning her harvest-themed Halloween party, I was in talks with a venture group out of Toronto for a Series B round. My co-founder Priya and I had quietly built a user base that included NGOs, impact investors, and a few sharp, very private funds in Europe, but that was just the start. What mattered more wasn't the money. It was the silence I was finally ready to answer with something louder than words: proof. And now, with the spring dinner looming, I could feel the old wound itching again. Except this time, it wasn't begging for a bandage, it was ready for a scar. The idea for Lumagrid didn't arrive in some dramatic lightning bolt moment. It crept in like moss on the edges of my burnout. I was working at a mid-tier analytics firm in Chicago then, grinding out models for clients I didn't believe in, pitching slide decks to executives who couldn't distinguish between correlation and causation, drowning in a cubicle life that paid well but emptied me out. It was late, 11:47 p.m., and I was eating cold Thai takeout at my desk, watching a fund tank on live feed because they'd invested in a green apparel company that turned out to be laundering its manufacturing through a sweatshop in Vietnam. I remember staring at the ticker and thinking, they had the data, they just didn't know where to look. And that's when it clicked. What if I could build something that didn't just chase returns but filtered investments through truth? Real-time verification of ESG claims, market trend overlays that accounted for ethical volatility, a platform that could see what people didn't want you to see, because not knowing cost people more than just money. It cost trust, it cost futures. I built the prototype alone, nights and weekends, using free-tier cloud tools and a sketchpad filled with lines of mock code. At first it was all theory, spaghetti against the wall. But I had one thing that most people in my firm didn't. Grit forged in years of being underestimated. When nobody claps for you, you learn to build without applause. It took 2 years to move from prototype to product, and somewhere along the way, I found Priya, an ex-BlackRock data scientist who had also grown sick of pretending impact investing meant tossing a recycling symbol on your pitch deck. We met at an ethics and finance panel that only 10 people attended. Afterward, we got coffee, and by the end of that 2-hour conversation, I knew she'd be the other half of this thing. She didn't care about prestige, she cared about proof. We poured every spare second into the platform. While Melody was posting sponsored content about her journey as a lifestyle coach, and Heath was allegedly consulting for a tech startup that didn't exist beyond a LinkedIn page, I was pulling all-nighters debugging our scoring algorithm and pitching Lumagrid in virtual meetings that started at 3 a.m. for European clients. By our 3rd year, we had 8 angel investors, 4 major clients, and were onboarding 2 philanthropic funds that managed to combine $230 million in assets. But the best part? No one in my family knew. Not my father. Not Melody. Not even my Aunt Joni, who somehow managed to know everyone's business before they did. I didn't post about it. I didn't drop hints at family events. I wore the same old boots to holiday dinners and let them believe I was still between contracts. Colette once cornered me in the powder room and offered to connect me with a boutique firm looking for female hires, as if she were tossing a bone to a starving stray. I smiled and said I'd think about it. Then I went home and watched our Q4 user adoption rate triple projections. I kept the secret, not because I was afraid they'd ruin it, but because I didn't want their hands anywhere near it. This thing was mine, and in a way, it was also my mother's. I coded parts of the interface in her favorite color, slate blue. I named our privacy protocol Vivian Shield after her. She used to say the world never made space for quiet women, so they had to carve their own. Lumagrid was my carving knife. Then came the Toronto meeting. The venture group, Rainlight Capital, invited us to pitch in person. I flew out with Priya in late March, wearing a blazer I'd bought secondhand, and sneakers I didn't bother to upgrade. Our deck was clean, our numbers sharp, and our ethics tight. The partners leaned in. They asked real questions. And when they shook our hands at the end, I saw it, the gleam of belief. The deal wasn't signed yet, but the message was clear. We see you. We know what this is. That's what made the timing so cruel. The spring dinner landed right between our pitch and their final decision. I didn't want to go. I had nothing to prove to them. But I knew better. These people measured loyalty in attendance, not integrity. Missing the dinner would confirm every stereotype they held about me. Ungrateful, cold, difficult. And despite everything, a small part of me still wanted to stand in that polished dining room, look them all in the eye, and know what they didn't. That, I had already won. So I RSVP'd, and I prepared the one thing they'd never expect: silence. Because nothing unnerves the powerful more than someone they've ignored refusing to beg. The days leading up to the spring dinner were unusually quiet, both in my inbox and in my head. Rainlight Capital had said they'd reach out by the following week. The due diligence was done, The numbers were strong, now it was just a matter of time. A few signatures, and Lumagrid would close a $38 million Series B that would push us into the kind of growth most startups only dream about. And yet, I found myself organizing spreadsheets I already knew by heart, double-checking slide decks no one would see, rereading old Slack messages from Priya just to remind myself of how far we'd come. Because I wasn't worried about the deal, I was worried about dinner. It was held every spring, always the first Saturday of April, always at the house I once called home. The same house where my mother used to make lemon risotto from scratch, humming to Fleetwood Mac. The same kitchen where she taught me how to balance equations on the back of an old grocery list. Now it was a showcase, marble countertops, gold faucets, a refrigerator that told time. Colette had turned it into a catalog page from some aspirational lifestyle brand, all candles and curated playlists. It felt like trespassing to even walk through the front door. The guest list was always the same. Family, some family-adjacent people, and a few of Colette's glam friends from her philanthropy circle. A euphemism for women who wore diamonds to brunch and took meetings from hot yoga. Melody would be there, of course, floating around in her pastel maxi dress and faux sincere smile. Heath, too, probably talking about his mentorship initiative, which was basically him giving advice no one asked for. And my father, Grant Crane, presiding over it all like a retired monarch in a tailored linen suit, half listening and fully judging. I knew the script. I'd lived it too many times. Arrive on time, compliment the wine, pretend not to notice the framed portrait of Colette in the front hallway where my mother's used to be. Smile when Melody mentions her influencer brand deals. Nod politely when Heath jokes about how I love my spreadsheets. It was a performance, and everyone had their role. Mine was the outlier who doesn't complain, and I'd been nailing it for years. But this time felt different. Because this time, I wasn't arriving empty-handed. This time, I had a story humming under my skin, a secret stitched into every thread of my dress. I wore black. Not the funeral kind, but the I know exactly what I'm doing kind. Simple, sleek, sharp. I carried nothing but my phone and a small leather notebook, both zipped into a bag that cost more than Melody's entire skincare routine. I didn't need to prove anything, I just needed to survive the gauntlet. Still, the weight of it hung over me like a storm cloud. Not because I was afraid of confrontation, but because I was exhausted. There's a special kind of tired that comes from being polite to people who trained you to disappear. It wasn't about anger anymore, it was about preservation. The morning of the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not to adjust anything, but to remind myself that this face, this life was mine, not theirs. Not a project. Not a disappointment wrapped in a high-functioning shell. Just me. I got in the car at 6, drove the familiar route through the old neighborhood, past the bakery where my mom used to buy birthday cakes, the library where she'd take me after ballet class, the old park bench where she once told me, "Don't dim yourself to make them more comfortable." I arrived 10 minutes early, because of course I did. The front door was already open, the smell of rosemary and citrus wafting out like an invitation wrapped in condescension. I stepped inside and was greeted by soft jazz and softer voices. Colette appeared first, all high cheekbones and higher heels, and kissed the air next to my cheek. "Tilda. So punctual," she said, as if I'd arrived to deliver bad news instead of dinner banter. "Colette?" I nodded. "Lovely aroma, is it the roast or the perfume?" She smiled, a tight, unreadable smile. "Both." I hung my coat, took a glass of wine and walked into the lion's den. Melody was perched by the fireplace, regaling a group with some tale about a brand trip to Tulum. Heath was in the corner with my father, both laughing at something that felt like it had an inside joke stitched into it. No one looked up when I entered. I didn't mind. I wasn't here to be noticed, I was here to remember exactly why I stopped needing their validation. The seating chart naturally had me at the far end of the table. Not at the foot, not at the head, just safely distant from every conversation that mattered. I took my seat, sipped my wine and waited. I could feel something brewing. The air had that brittle sharpness that always precedes a break. And I was ready for it. Because I wasn't just Tilda Crane, invisible daughter anymore. I was the founder of a company they'd soon learn to regret underestimating. And the reckoning had a dinner bell. The first strike came in the form of a compliment. "I heard you're doing something with finance now," said a woman I vaguely recognized as Colette's Pilates instructor. Her tone was warm, in that way people speak when trying to guess if they should take you seriously. "Melody said you're freelancing? That must give you so much freedom." I smiled. "Yes, wild freedom. Sometimes I even have weekends off." "Oh, that's so balanced," she said, then turned to compliment the watercress garnish. And so it began. The gauntlet of contempt, as I secretly called it, was the first course at every Crane family dinner. A series of carefully delivered microcuts, each served with wine and passive-aggressive curiosity. Melody leaned in next, her voice honeyed and far too loud. "Tilda, you look rested. What's your secret? Sleeping in? No high-stakes job stress to age you?" I kept my tone flat. "Exfoliation and boundaries." She blinked, then giggled like I'd told a joke she didn't quite get, but was determined to be in on. The main room was glossy with conversation. People laughed a little too loudly, clinked glasses with choreographed cheer. Colette floated through it all like a lifestyle guru dressed for a Vogue feature, checking on courses and correcting place settings with theatrical grace. She'd set the table with handwritten name cards and tiny bundles of dried lavender wrapped in twine. There were 3 forks, and no one dared use the wrong one. The playlist was curated. The champagne was French. The whole evening smelled like money trying to look effortless. Then my father tapped his glass. Grant Crane still had a presence. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who looked good in every family photo and never had to ask for a spotlight because it followed him naturally. He stood at the head of the table, his gaze sweeping across the guests like a practiced general. "I want to thank you all for joining us tonight," he began. "This dinner means a great deal to me, and to Colette, of course, because it reminds us of what family is about. Support, celebration, connection." I took a sip of my wine to keep from snorting. He went on for another minute or two, listing vague anecdotes about perseverance and unity. He thanked Heath for his latest consulting endeavor, whatever that meant, praised Melody for her growing media presence, and gave Colette a flowery nod for organizing this beautiful gathering. Then he paused. "And Tilda," he said, turning toward me like an afterthought, "here we go. I hope you're finding your path," he said. "I know things have been exploratory for you these past few years, but there's no shame in taking your time. Not everyone's journey looks the same." It was meant to sound paternal, encouraging. To the untrained ear, it probably did, but I'd lived too long under that tone not to hear the judgment woven into it. "Some of us just take the scenic route," I replied evenly. A few people chuckled. Melody fake laughed like she'd been programmed to do so. My father just smiled. "As long as it leads somewhere meaningful." It was a line dipped in approval for everyone else at the table. But for me, it was a leash, a reminder that I wasn't where he thought I should be, that success only counted if he could understand it, point to it, brag about it over brunch. The first course arrived. Something herbaceous and circular that Colette announced as micro-season. I didn't touch it. Instead, I watched the people at that table. Watched how Melody kept turning her wrist to show off her bracelet. How Heath talked over anyone who didn't agree with him. How my father nodded along, laughing on cue. This wasn't dinner, it was a performance, and I was the only one not sticking to the script. At one point, Colette sat beside me. Her perfume smelled like something expensive and effortful. She leaned close and said, "We've been thinking about refreshing the upstairs guest room, maybe a yoga den." My old room. I just smiled. "Hope the feng shui's good." She hesitated. "It's important that this house continues to evolve, you know, that it reflects the future." I didn't say what I was thinking. That you can polish a tomb and call it a palace, but it's still full of ghosts. Dessert came early, which I should have taken as a sign. A delicate trio of citrus sorbet, dark chocolate truffle, and something purple that tasted like regret. The small talk was thinning. The tension was thickening. My father refilled his glass, then cleared his throat. "There's one more thing we'd like to share with you all." I felt it before he said it, that awful prickling behind my ribs, like your body knows the bullet is coming, even if the gun hasn't gone off. And then he said it. "After much discussion and reflection, we've decided it's time to simplify things moving forward. The house, the family trust, the structure of support, We're refocusing our energy on the parts of this family that actively participate in its growth. His eyes flicked toward me for just a moment. Which means, Tilda, we're making some adjustments to the estate plan. The table fell silent. Even Colette stopped smiling. Effective immediately, he continued. You'll no longer be listed as a primary beneficiary. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything. Not the low murmur of shocked guests, not the clink of cutlery, not even my own pulse. Just the ringing, a loud, deafening clarity that cut through everything else. That sentence, "You'll no longer be listed as a primary beneficiary," kept echoing in my head like a line from a bad courtroom drama. Except this wasn't fiction. This wasn't about money. It was about erasure. I blinked once, twice, then looked straight at my father. He didn't flinch. "We believe this is the best decision for everyone," he said, in the same voice he used when firing assistants or dismissing vendors. "There are expectations of family contribution, visibility, representation. Your choices, while understandable, have made you less aligned with our current vision." Vision? Like I was a branding error. Colette put a hand on his arm gently, like a woman keeping the tone civilized. "It's not personal, darling. You're just on a different path. We're simply adjusting the family structure to reflect that." I wanted to laugh, truly, because there was nothing accidental about the timing. The spring dinner was always their stage, their chance to parade wealth and stability like a prized stallion. And I was their one blemish, the child with no glitter, no headlines, no curated life for them to parade. So they did what people like them always do when they don't understand something. They cut it out. Melody gasped for effect. "Dad, are you sure?" she said, hand fluttering toward her heart like a bad soap actress. Heath said nothing, just sipped his wine, eyes low. I let the silence sit. I let it stretch long enough to make people shift in their chairs. My mind raced not because I was panicking, but because part of me couldn't believe how textbook this was. How clean, how cold. And then, without meaning to, I smiled. "Wow," I said softly, "that's bold, even for you." My father stiffened just slightly. "We thought it best to be transparent." "No," I said, setting down my glass. "You thought it best to humiliate me publicly. Big difference." Someone, maybe Uncle Rob, cleared their throat down the table. A fork clinked nervously against a plate. "I've never asked for anything," I continued. "Not a loan, not a favor, not even recognition. All I ever did was show up, but thank you for finally confirming what I've known since I was 16. I was never one of you." Colette tilted her head like she was about to offer a soothing phrase. I cut her off with a glance. "You remodeled my room before my mother's clothes were even cold. You auctioned off her garden furniture like it was junk, and now you're scrubbing me out of the books like a typo. So go ahead, make your edits. I'm not part of your little empire." My father's jaw worked, tight and mechanical. "You're being emotional." "No," I said, rising slowly from my chair, voice steady. "I'm being honest." I could feel every eye on me now. Guests who'd spent the whole night pretending I didn't exist were suddenly riveted. Melody sat frozen, fork in midair. Colette's face was unreadable, but her nails tapped the stem of her wineglass, just once. And then... Right then my phone buzzed. I glanced down. Rainlight Capital confirmed term sheet signed. "Welcome to Series B." I stared at the screen for a second, then blinked. It took everything in me not to laugh. I looked up, slow and calm. "You know what's funny?" No one answered. Just now I got a message, the kind that comes after years of work, after rejection and grit and endless nights in front of a screen. "You see, while you've been busy perfecting your dinner parties and deleting me from your narrative, I've been building something. Quietly. Relentlessly." I paused. Let it settle. Even the jazz playlist seemed to have stopped. "I just closed a $38 million round of funding." Dead silence. "Which, if you're counting, puts my company valuation above this entire property portfolio, including the Aspen house." Melody choked on her wine. Colette's hand froze mid-sip. My father's face didn't move, but his knuckles whitened around the glass. And me? I just stood there, calm as dusk. "I may not be your ideal daughter, but I built something you never could, respect that didn't need your name, or your money, or your approval." I picked up my purse, slipped my phone back in, and looked down the table one last time. "Good luck with your vision," I said. Then I walked out. The night air hit me like a baptism, cold, sharp, freeing. I didn't look back as the door clicked shut behind me. Didn't need to. I could feel the vacuum I left behind in that room, their stunned silence clinging to the crystal stemware, the performance unraveling now that the wrong daughter had stolen the spotlight. I walked straight to my car, heels tapping out a defiant rhythm on the polished, stone path Colette had installed last year to elevate the curb appeal. She'd said it like the house were a handbag, like history was a thing you could bleach and restage. Once inside, I shut the door, let my head fall against the steering wheel, and laughed. Loud. Too loud. I felt it shake loose in my chest, half joy, half release, all disbelief. I had fantasized about that moment, sure. Rehearsed lines in my head, imagined their gasps, even pictured the table shaking with the force of my exit. But I never thought it would actually happen. I started the car, pulled out of the driveway without hesitation. The house, my childhood, my exile, shrunk in the rearview mirror, and with every street I passed, I felt lighter. By the time I hit the main road, I was humming along with the radio. My phone buzzed again. Priya, you see this? Rainlight posted already. It's official. We did it. Call me. I didn't answer right away. I just smiled and whispered, we really did. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I drove across town, down toward the south side, where the lights weren't curated and the roads didn't care what car you drove. I parked in front of a narrow brownstone that had become my second home over the past year. Inside was Silas. Silas wasn't family, not the kind that shares your blood or Christmas cards, but he was something sturdier. We met 2 years ago at a financial ethics conference that barely anyone attended. He asked one brutally smart question from the audience that made half the panelists stammer. Later, over vending machine coffee, we swapped stories, not just about algorithms and startups, but about disappointments. Invisible childhoods. The kind of wounds that don't show up in MRIs but shape you all the same. Silas opened the door in sweats and a Data Kills Bias hoodie. His hair was wild, his eyes lit up. I saw the post, he said before I even spoke. You did it. We did it. I corrected, stepping into the warmth. You've been in this from the beginning. He pulled me into a hug that undid me. And just like that, I was no longer in exile. We spent the next hour eating leftover pad thai and rereading the Rainlight press release like it was a bedtime story. They called Lumagrid the future of accountable investment. They quoted me, transparency is not a luxury, it's a human right. I'd forgotten I even said that in the pitch. It sounded strange seeing my own voice in serif font. You know what I'm proud of? Silas said, leaning back, chopsticks still in hand. Everything, he grinned, that you didn't just win. You won without bending. You stayed you. That hit harder than I expected. Because for so long I'd tried to mold myself into what my family might finally applaud. Softer, quieter, more photogenic, less threatening, but none of it ever worked. And tonight proved why. I wasn't built for their version of success. I was built for my own. Later, when the world had gone quiet and the adrenaline settled into a hum, I pulled out my phone and opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. Inside was a photo of my mom. She was sitting on the edge of our old garden bench, flower on her sweater, smiling at something I'd said off camera. I stared at it for a long time. I hope you saw that, I whispered. I hope you're laughing. Because I knew she would be. This wasn't just about Lumagrid, or the trust fund, or even Colette's backhanded cruelty. It was about legacy. And tonight I claimed mine. By the next morning, the story had already leaked. Rainlight's press team had gone live with a feature article in Financial Current, complete with a sleek photo of me and Priya in front of our office's mural. The future is transparent. The headline? How two outsiders are redefining ethical capital. My LinkedIn was a battlefield of connection requests, half-hearted congratulations from former coworkers, and PR agencies sniffing around like bloodhounds. I even got a DM from an investor who once ghosted me 3 years ago. Would love to reconnect. Right? But nothing prepared me for the group text. Melody. Just saw the article. Didn't know you were working on something this big. Impressive. Let's talk when you have a moment. Proud of you. That last one, proud of you. Like the knife had never landed. Like he hadn't cut me out of the family estate in front of 16 dinner guests and a rosemary truffle. Like none of it ever happened. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just repackaging. They wanted back in. They always do, when the returns are good enough. I stared at the message for a full minute before locking my phone. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The version of me who would have agonized over how to respond, she didn't exist anymore. She'd been erased and replaced not by Colette, but by me. I didn't go into work that morning. I went to the lake. There's this bench just south of Belmont Harbor. Windy, quiet, a little uneven. My mom used to take me there when I was young, feeding ducks and dodging geese. I sat there, coffee in hand, and watched the water fold over itself, calm and unrushed. And then my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but the name flashed across the screen. Vivian's Bench, my private line reserved for anything Lumagrid related. I answered. "Is this Tilda Crane?" came the voice. Male, measured, a bit British. "Yes. This is Julian Black from Horizon 1 Capital. I believe you were expecting a call next quarter, but I read your Rainlight announcement, and I'm ready to talk now. If you are." Horizon 1. The name we'd been chasing since the beginning. Priya and I had put together a speculative deck just for them, hoping one day they'd take notice. "Julian," I said, standing, "I've been ready for years." We talked logistics, follow-ups, next steps. By the time I hung up, my heart was beating like war drums. Not from nerves, from knowing, from being known. I called Priya. She didn't even say hello. "You're trending on Ethical Alpha," she blurted. "And guess who just emailed? The UN Sustainable Finance Summit, panel invite. You. Keynote." I sat back on the bench and grinned. "Let's make them regret sleeping on us." "Oh," Priya added, voice sharp with delight, and Melody followed me on Instagram. Like, should I be worried? Only if she starts quoting the mission statement. That night, as I curled into the safety of my own home, my apartment filled with messy shelves, unmatched mugs, and zero pretenses, I wrote a letter I never intended to send. "Dear Dad, you always said that legacy is about what you leave behind. But you never asked who you leave it with. You built a house of glass and called it family. I built a fortress of code, conviction, and conscience. I may not have your last name on a building, but I'll have mine on something better. A future that matters. Tilda." I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer next to a Polaroid of me and Mom, and exhaled. That dinner was supposed to be my ending. Instead, it became my origin story. Because the real power isn't in being accepted, it's in walking away when you're not. A week after the dinner, I hosted a celebration. Not the flashy kind with champagne towers and rented rooftops, but the kind where you kick off your shoes at the door and laugh until your stomach hurts. The kind that smells like garlic naan and laughter. The kind that reminds you that family isn't about blood, it's about recognition. Priya arrived first, hauling a tote bag filled with mismatched wine bottles and a tub of her homemade chickpea salad that somehow always tasted like redemption. Behind her came Silas with his laptop, insisting he needed to run one last stress test on the beta rollout before we could toast. And then came Geordie, my neighbor-turned-friend who worked as a nurse and once saved me from an anxiety spiral with nothing but peanut butter cookies and zero judgment. They didn't bring gifts, they brought presents. We squeezed around my tiny kitchen table, spilling into the living room where no chair matched and the rug curled up in the corner. There was no dinner bell, no seating chart, no hierarchy. Just voices overlapping, jokes flying, and the kind of affection that doesn't need announcement. At some point, Silas raised his glass, still half full with ginger ale. "To Tilda," he said, voice unpolished and sincere. "For doing the impossible and doing it without asking permission." They clinked their glasses to mine. I smiled not just because of the words, but because this was the first time in years I felt surrounded, not surveilled. These people knew me. Not the filtered version, not the holiday gathering, performance, me. Later that night, as the dishes piled up and Priya tried to explain her favorite algorithm using wine corks, I stepped onto the balcony alone. The city breathed around me, soft wind, sirens in the distance, the occasional flicker of someone else's celebration through their window. My phone buzzed again, a new message from my father. "We should talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding." I stared at the words. He still didn't get it. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate choice, a public one. And the only thing he misunderstood was assuming I'd still need his invitation to sit at the table. I didn't respond. I blocked the number. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. What I felt was something simpler, cleaner, clarity. Back inside, Jordy was retelling the story of how I accidentally unplugged the Wi-Fi mid-investor pitch and still closed the deal. Priya was adding in dramatic sound effects. Silas rolled his eyes like a long-suffering brother. And I stood there, watching the room, something in my chest finally loosening. They weren't my blood, but they were my family. They saw the late-night versions of me, the panicked texts, the quiet doubts, the dry sarcasm masking fear. And they stayed. They listened. They believed. No trust fund could buy that. No family name could replace it. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt held. Not because someone said I belonged, but because I didn't have to prove I did. In the weeks that followed, I began drawing boundaries like blueprints, clean lines, precise measurements, and absolutely no room for maybe. The first one I laid down was simple. No more pretending. No more birthday brunches with fake smiles. No more smiling through veiled insults or accepting invitations that felt more like surveillance than celebration. No more just showing up for family's sake. When Melody sent a DM asking if I'd be open to grabbing coffee and talking about brand synergy, I responded with a single sentence. We're not aligned, but I wish you well. I didn't elaborate. I didn't soften the edge. When my father sent another email, this time full of qualifiers and corporate apologies, I archived it without reading past the first line. There was no satisfaction in it, no gloating, just peace. Because boundaries, I learned, aren't about keeping others out. They're about keeping your integrity in. I told Priya I wanted to take the lead on our company's ethics charter rollout, not because I wanted credit, but because I wanted to be the one who made sure we never became like the people who tried to silence me. I sat down with our junior analysts one by one, not just to train them on metrics, but to make sure they knew they were seen. And I started doing something I'd never done before. I told people no. No to the advisor who wanted me to glam up for more press appeal. No to the magazine that wanted to frame my story as a rags to riches narrative, ignoring the nuance, the work, the scars. But I also started saying yes. Yes to things that felt like freedom. Yes to keynote panels about women in finance. Yes to mentoring 2 undergrad girls who reminded me too much of myself at 21. Yes to finally putting my name on the patent I had deferred for 2 years out of imposter syndrome. I bought a new apartment. Nothing extravagant, but full of light and odd angles and creaky floors. I painted the walls deep blue, the exact color of my mother's favorite cardigan, and set up her chipped book club mug on the kitchen shelf like a shrine. When the trust lawyer called, surprised, it seemed, by my lack of response to the inheritance removal, I told him flatly, I don't want a cent, I've already inherited everything of value. He tried to argue. I ended the call. Colette emailed a month later with a polite invitation to her summer solstice gala. I deleted it. It wasn't a grudge, it wasn't revenge, it was discipline. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. I was free. And in that freedom, I discovered a version of myself I'd only glimpsed in moments of quiet defiance. A version that didn't flinch when ignored. A version that didn't chase approval like oxygen. A version that didn't need a seat at a table designed to shrink her. I sat in my new living room one night, barefoot, listening to Nina Simone and reviewing onboarding docs for our newest team hire. Outside, the city kept humming its lullaby of soft sirens and window light. Inside, I felt rooted. I hadn't just changed careers. I'd changed my emotional architecture. I had built boundaries not as barriers, but as arches. Strong, clean, and opening only in the directions I chose. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a daughter surviving in the shadows. I felt like a woman standing in her own sunlight. It started small. An email from a community college in Milwaukee asking if I'd consider speaking to their finance students. Then a message from a nonprofit in Kansas requesting access to Lumagrid's tools for their ethical investment initiative. And then a handwritten letter from a woman in Montreal who said she used our platform to pull her late husband's pension out of a shady venture fund, saving her and her kids from losing everything. I kept every one of those messages. Because somewhere along the way, my success had stopped being about proving something to the people who ignored me. It had become about building something that made silence impossible. We launched Lumagrid's free access public tool 3 months after the Series B closed. No paywalls, no gimmicks, Just clean, user-friendly access to accountability metrics for small investors, teachers, single parents, anyone who'd been told they were too uninformed to matter in the market. Priya and I watched in real time as usage spiked across rural states, border towns, and underserved communities. And with every new user, I felt a piece of my mother's voice return. She used to say, the only legacy worth leaving is one someone else can use. So I gave my legacy away. Deliberately, unapologetically. We partnered with community education hubs. We funded coding boot camps for girls in Detroit and Tulsa. We offered anonymous consultations for whistleblowers. And when Horizon One Capital invited me to sit on their ethics review board, I agreed, but on one condition. Every board seat must include one non-VC, non-wealth insider with real-life community stakes. They agreed. Change, I was learning, doesn't happen with vengeance. It happens with vision. A quiet ripple turning into a current strong enough to pull entire systems in a new direction. Still, the Crane name lingered like a watermark I hadn't chosen. I'd see it now and then, on old articles, legacy fund rankings, real estate headlines, and every time I felt that strange flicker of nausea. But I didn't run from it, I reclaimed it. At our annual Lumagrid conference, our first ever in-person summit, I opened the keynote with a story. Not a slide deck, not a graph. A story about a girl who grew up in a house that didn't see her. A girl who built a company not to be noticed but to make noticing obsolete. The audience was quiet as I spoke, not silent. Present, listening. And when I ended, I pulled up a single slide. A garden bench, half lit by evening sun, a woman in a cardigan laughing at something just out of frame. The caption read, "In memory of Vivian Crane, my first investor." There was a long pause, and then the room stood. Not in a rushed performative way, but the kind of standing that says we understand. Later that night, as the summit wound down and the wine glasses emptied, a young woman approached me. She looked maybe 22, wearing the kind of too big blazer you borrow from a friend just to look credible in rooms that weren't built for you. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for existing the way you do." That line stayed with me, because she didn't say winning, or succeeding, she said existing. In a world that told me to shrink, erase, or contort, I had simply refused to vanish. And in doing so, I'd left a trail someone else could follow, not toward applause, but toward agency. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror the morning after the conference, brushing my teeth in mismatched pajamas, hair a chaotic tribute to the after-party, and thought, this is it. Not the fame, not the valuation numbers, not even the speech that earned a standing ovation. This quiet, this calm, this ordinary, beautiful certainty that I am no longer orbiting other people's expectations. I am the center of my own map. There was a time when I couldn't brush my teeth without thinking about what version of me might be more acceptable. Straighter hair, brighter lipstick, fewer opinions. There was a time when I rehearsed dinner conversations on the train, terrified of saying the wrong thing, of being too much. But those times were behind me now. I had been cast out of a family that prized image over integrity. I had been erased from the books. I had been disowned not because I failed, but because I didn't fail quietly. And still, I rose, not for revenge, not even for justice, but for wholeness. It's a strange thing, feeling whole. It sneaks up on you, not like a surge, but like a steadiness, a return, a closing of a loop that once felt endless. I sat at my desk later that afternoon, a cup of cold coffee beside me, and opened a folder labeled Vivian's Garden. Inside were all the things I used to be afraid to say: journal entries, unsent letters, fragments of speeches I never gave. I read one aloud. "You don't have to bleed for people to see you." And just like that, I exhaled, because it was true. I didn't need to earn my space at a table that had never fed me. I didn't need to beg to be understood. I didn't even need to prove anything anymore. What I needed, what I chose, was peace. I spent that evening on the fire escape with Silas, both of us wrapped in blankets, eating ice cream straight from the carton. No tech talk, no pitches, just the soft glow of a city exhaling, and two people who didn't need anything from each other but presence. "You know what I've noticed?" he asked mid-spoonful. "You smile more now." I didn't answer. I just handed him the chocolate swirl and leaned back against the wall. Because he was right. I was no longer the girl waiting for approval. I was the woman who gave it to herself. And in that, there was more power than any inheritance could have offered. Have you ever been told you weren't enough, only to realize you were simply too much for the wrong people? It's a strange kind of clarity, isn't it? That moment when you stop asking for a seat at someone else's table and start building your own. I know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be labeled difficult, distant, or ungrateful for not fitting into the boxes others carefully designed. I know the sting of being cut out, not just of documents or dinners, but of identity, of legacy. But I also know what happens when you stop trying to be palatable and start being real. And if my story resonated with you, even just a little, I want to hear yours. Drop it in the comments below. Let's make space for the journeys that don't follow tradition, for the quiet rebels, for the daughters who didn't get their name on the family crest, but built an empire from scratch anyway. If my journey spoke to something in you, please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. Because approval is temporary, but self-trust? That's a legacy no one can erase. Tilda Crane.